Hey, welcome to this week's edition of Family by Design. Really glad you jumped on here. This week, Liz and I are talking about counting when it comes to disciplining your kids. And so we've titled this, Stop Counting. And we're going to give you some reason as to why it's important to stop counting when you tell your kids to do something, especially, the little ones. You tell them to do something and then you count to 2 or to 5 or to 10, allowing them to continue to disobey you for just a few more seconds. So be encouraged and strengthened, and this is going to bring some wisdom and help to you.
1, 2, 3, 4. Counting. I don't know about you.
Is that how we're starting this conversation for real?
Yeah, for real.
All right.
Why do people count? And specifically, we count for a number of reasons.
So I can give you like 100 reasons.
Yeah. But specifically...
Did you get that play on words
yeah.
pun there? Give you 100 reasons, count.
Oh my goodness.
Go ahead. To the point.
To the point. Counting when disciplining children. It's such an easy thing to get into, but ultimately, I don't believe that it will benefit you or your children. Basically, you're just saying for 10 seconds or 5 seconds, you can continue being disobedient. But when I get to 5, you better stop being disobedient.
You're subverting your own authority when you do it.
Right. And so kids will know, I can continue to push this boundary until you get to 5. And then at 5, maybe I'm going to stop. But you're just teaching them to keep going. And I think about the importance of quick, concise obedience, especially for our children, that when they hear your voice, they need to obey right away because it could save their life. And I just think about the story that I heard. When I heard this story, it changed my perspective and the reason and the importance for children being obedient. It became not necessarily about me anymore, but for their protection, is whenever, if a child was running out into the street.
We always use that
Yeah, but it's
scenario.
But it
is a real scenario, potentially.
It's legit.
There's other things too. They could stick something in a light, or
Yes.
a socket in the wall or whatever.
Sure. Okay.
Lots of things.
But when they could have physical harm come to them that could lead to death.
Yeah.
And they don't obey your voice or have been taught and trained to quick obedience right away, it could cost them their life.
So the truth is there's no such thing as quick obedience. It's only...
Oh, right.
So there is, I guess you could say, if you want to compare, that there's delayed obedience.
Right.
But delayed obedience is just disobedience.
Right. And a different... Right.
So it's like you either obey or you don't. And if you have to count to even 1, your child is already in disobedience. Now, obviously, you got to give them a moment to move or whatever. I'm not saying that. But if you're going to go and count, you're actually saying that, okay, well, you can disobey me for another second. It's delayed, but it's not really disobedience. It's just delayed obedience, so that is disobedience.
Right.
So what you're doing is you're saying it's okay up until a certain point to disobey me. And you subvert your own authority, and then you're not disciplining them for direct disobedience. You're basically allowing them to disobey you 1 second at a time until you've had enough.
Right.
And then you've taken this whole thing about training your child properly and giving them proper discipline. You've taken the whole thing and you've turned it and made it about how you feel, or if you're fed up with it or whatever. And you're telling your child without telling them. You're telling them, I don't really want to have to deal with you. So I'm going to give you 1 more second, 2 more seconds, 3 more seconds. Your child needs you to go to them and say, stop that. And then when they don't stop, you say, okay, now you're going to reap the consequences of your actions. And of course, when they're real little, you spank them. When they get older, you don't count with older kids. It's always this word. This is really geared for the younger kids,
right.
The kids that are, 1, 2, 3, 4 years old, whatever. So don't count. Don't do that. I hear people do this all the time. We see it in stores. We know we have friends or whatever that they do. And I'm like, they don't realize what they're doing. What they're doing is they're making it okay in their child's mind to continue to disobey them. Because obedience has a line.
Right.
And when that line is crossed, it turns into rebellion. So when you have told your child to do something and they either delay in doing it or they directly go against what you said, they have moved over into rebellion. And when you are counting, you are saying, I'm going to allow you to stay in rebellion just a little bit longer. A little bit. Go ahead, stay. Rebellion is the sin of witchcraft. It's as the sin of witchcraft. So there's a parallel there that you don't want your kids to be in.
Right.
Every child has rebellion in them. It's a matter of the parent taking the initiative and driving that rebellion out. Some children have more, some have less. You know, we've had kids that, some of our kids that we could have done the counting thing, and we've had a couple of them when they were younger that we could just say, do not do that. And boom, they'd straighten up right away.
Right.
Because they had a fear. But they had, and I say fear, a healthy fear of what would happen if they crossed the boundaries. It's because we didn't keep moving that line.
Right.
All you're doing when you're counting is you're prolonging the inevitable, which for a lot of parents, the inevitable is that they're never going to discipline their kids. It's like you're giving threats that has no backing to it. You know,
Right.
it's kind of like our current so-called commander in chief, and it's like, you all stop doing that stuff over there. We're going to come and bomb you or whatever. And you know, it didn't. You know, they're like, yeah, whatever. You're insane, which he is. But anyways, the one before, you know, whenever he, like his very first month in office, there was, you know, ISIS and stuff or whatever. They were doing what they do, terrorizing the world. And he comes in with these, I forget what they kind of missiles they were, Tomahawk missiles or I don't know, something, and wiped a whole bunch of them out. And then the terrorist world was silenced for years because they knew, you cross this line and we're going to take you out. Well, your child needs to know, you cross this line, I'm going to take you out. I'm going to take you out back to the woodshed and I'm going to shiny your hiney, right? And I'm going to light you up. Like, they need to know that. And they need to know when you're bit. And here's the thing, is it's not about being cruel or mean or whatever. It's when you draw that line, quit all the counting crap, get serious about disciplining your child. And then you take the time, you take the effort, you do it calmly, you do it correctly, you use an object, not a destructive object, but one that will inflict some pain on their butt. You do it properly, you do it in order, you do it biblically, and you will reap the results of it.
That's right.
It's the parents that keep pushing it off that they're just allowing their kids to stay in rebellion.
So would you say then not disciplining or counting ultimately is selfishness on the parent's part?
Yeah, it's either ignorance or selfishness.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there could be people that like they were raised like that and they don't really get what's happening there. And so
Right.
they're like, you know, they just instinctively do that because their mom counted to them every time they disobeyed. But I think, you know, a lot of people, they are selfish and they don't want to have to deal with their kid. Well, if you don't deal with your kid when they're younger, they're going to deal with you when they're older.
That's a true story. Because
Discipline your children properly.
right. So don't count, and just because I feel like whenever you count, you're just giving them permission to keep, you know, being disobedient till that very second when
It's rebellion approval.
Right, a rebellion approval. And then I go back and I think, what is the whole purpose behind training and disciplining our children? Is that when they grow up, they understand proper discipline and obedience to the Lord. Like, we should
Absolutely
get to this place that when we're older, when we're hearing the voice of God tell us to do something or not do something, that we obey him right away, because he can save our life if we'll do things to obey in that moment.
Yeah.
And not be delayed in the obedience.
Yeah.
And so if we allow our children to delay in the obedience, then ultimately we're teaching them, even with the Lord, as they grow up, that they can delay in the disobedience. Now, God is merciful and he's kind and he's faithful and he'll continue pursuing us, and he's, you know, not thrown off track by our delay in obedience. Like, we all have stories where we haven't obeyed right away the first time.
Sure.
And he still loves us. It didn't separate us from him. But it cost us something because we didn't.
Yeah.
we didn't obey.
And whenever people say, so this goes back to the story of like Samuel and Saul. And, Samuel ends up telling Saul because he disobeyed Samuel, the prophet's instructions. Right. He said that, obedience is better than sacrifice, and talks about how that rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. And it's kind of like what happens is that whenever, because Samuel is like, Saul was like, look, we made a sacrifice unto the Lord. Look at us, we're so great. And what he was doing was he was being manipulative. He was trying to get Samuel to go, oh, okay, well, I know I told you, I know I told you to do something and you disobeyed me, but look at the sacrifice. You know what, Saul? You did good. And in that sense, but Samuel didn't respond like that, but if he had of, then Saul would have, out of his rebellion, he would have been manipulating Samuel. And that's what oftentimes people do. And, when you're a kid, and so that's why rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, because witchcraft is manipulation. It's spiritual manipulation, but it also works very strongly in the flesh to try and get your way with something. And that's that's why it's as the sin of witchcraft, because rebellion is all about getting your way. Right. It's like when you're in the store with your kid and they're like, Mom, I want a candy bar. And you're like, no, we're getting ready to go to grandma's house for dinner, and she's going to have tons of candy and junk food there for you. You do not need a candy bar. But I want it, Mom. And what happens is finally like, okay, just get a candy bar and shut your mouth. I don't want you, you're embarrassing me. What happened is that your child's rebellion just manipulated you into doing something or not doing something, depending on the situation. Right. And they have now become manipulative with their rebellion, and it's as the sin of witchcraft. Because witchcraft is all about manipulating circumstances and things like that. And that's what rebellion does. Right.
And then you train them that if they push hard enough, or if they go down a certain way, that there's not actually going to, there's not going to be consequences. And in the story of Saul and Samuel, there was a major consequence. He lost
his kingship.
Yep. And so he had a consequence because he chose to do things his way.
Right.
And we as parents are teaching them or leading them into this place of, there's a definite line here, don't push it. That way you know what obedience looks like, so that as you grow, you can start practicing self-control on your own. You can start practicing obedience on your own and not have to have the consequences that could follow the disobedience.
Right.
But if they're not getting that when they're young, then they're not going to know it when they're old. Now, you learn things as you go, but usually we learn from from the school of Fort Knox, which we say like the hard way.
Hard Knocks.
Not
Fort Knox.
Yeah, Fort Knox. Not.
That's where they used to keep the gold.
Hard knocks, instead of just saying, I was properly disciplined and I realized that my parents did this for me. And actually, I think that whenever your kids grow up and they see that you properly and lovingly taught them obedience and disciplined them right, that they actually will love you or have more respect for you, because they saw that it wasn't about them. It wasn't about the parent. It was about the child, and training them in the way, that they should go, so that they won't depart from it. Right?
Yes. And so this is, there's a whole nother conversation you can have about what do you do with kids that you didn't discipline? Mm-hmm. Because there's a lot of parents, and unfortunately sometimes they won't own up to the fact that I didn't discipline my kid, but they are living with the results of it. And so there's a whole conversation we can be had about that. But for those that have younger kids that would hear this, and if you don't have younger kids and somebody who has kids that maybe are undisciplined, you could just go ahead and just send this to them, send this podcast to them, and it will maybe light a fire, help them gain some understanding to get their kids in the right direction. Because if you don't train your kids when they're younger, you're going to reap the benefits when they're older. Your kids are
reap
going
the consequences.
Yeah, not benefits,
right.
Negative benefits.
Right.
If that's such a thing, consequences is the right word. It's going to catch up with you and your child in the later years, and unfortunately, it affects oftentimes both. But when you have a disciplined child, they will become a disciplined adult. Now, it's not a guarantee, because I've seen situations where people train their kids well and their kids still turn out to be challenging individuals
Sure, yeah.
with hard hearts towards the Lord. And so everybody has that decision.
Right.
But you increase the chances of your child being a well-rounded, God-fearing citizen of the kingdom who does things in life to help other people and raise their families well, if you will simply discipline your kids properly.
Right.
Love them well, but discipline them. And part of loving is disciplining them well.
Right.
So, yeah, amen.
And so I'll just say, disciplining children it's really hard. And it can feel, when you're starting and going through the process, depending on your child, it can feel very difficult. It can feel like it costs you. It can feel like you're always doing this, and it's not fair. And if we choose, we can make it be about ourselves. But if we'll just reposture ourselves in those moments and know that this is right, this is godly. The word talks about disciplining our children. The word talks about obedience, and I will reap the fruit of it. Then that will help, just change your mind and your perspective while you're doing it. Because sometimes as the parent, it feels challenging to constantly feel like you're disciplining. Like every time you turn around, particular children are like always resisting you.
Right.
And
Right.
you're like, I don't want this. But if you stay consistent, because a lot of times that's what, children are thinking is, are they going to stay consistent and true to their word?
Yeah.
And as you stay consistent and true to your word, then they're going to realize that, just like with the story you shared about, whenever the bomb was let, or the missiles.
With our
and
former president.
yes,
Yeah.
I didn't know the right language to use or whatever. And they knew that he meant business. Stay consistent, draw the line, and your children will know that you mean business.
Amen.
Thank you for listening in on this conversation. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast, give us a 5-star rating, and write a review. Share with your friends and on your socials. For more information about Ward Ministries, check out wardmen.org. If this podcast is encouraging you on your marriage and family, we want to hear about it. Email us at info@wardmen.org, and make sure you keep your eye out weekly for the latest podcast on marriage and family.